In this lecture, I want to talk about how political parties help us solve coordination problems. Now, a political party can be defined as a group of candidates and elected officials organized under a common label for the purpose of attaining political positions of public authority. This is not the only definition of a political party, I'll admit that, but what this definition has going for it is that it highlights the fact that, one, there's a group of people that they're organized under a common label, that they have a common goal. However, one can also surmise that they have slightly differing interests or ideologies, and as a result, coordination is necessary. It's not the case that everybody automatically has identical interests and identical views on everything. What do political parties do? What function do they serve? Well, the important thing that we're going to be talking about is they help solve a coordination problem between citizens with similar interests. Another thing that they do is they help sort of solve coordination and collective action problems within Congress. Other things that they do, which I will not talk about so much in this lecture, they effectively provide information and feedback on policy, so they have a mediation function between government and society at large, and they represent interests or ideas. They have a symbolic function. They stand for things, right? They stand for important values, for example, and as a result, they have a symbolic function. But again, these last two things we're not going to talk about so much. So, one really important role of political parties in any democracy, it's not just our democracy, but any democracy, is they help solve coordination problems. Recall from past lectures that a coordination problem is a situation where many individuals want to adopt a common proposal or solution, but disagree on which solution to adopt. In other words, they prefer any matching to any non-matching outcome, but they have different first choice matching or first choice outcomes. Now, one coordination problem we've observed is the problem of candidate selection for people who share political interests. But another one is a policy problem. Which of the available policies should congressmen vote for? If they prefer some policies or no policy, it's possible that voting for their preferred policy could actually take votes away or prevent any policy from being passed if none of those policies can command a majority. Sometimes this, I think, can be captured by the expression that says, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? In searching for your top policy, you end up making it harder for a good policy that's not your favorite policy being enacted. So solving this policy dilemma. Well, we saw that party primaries and nominating conventions help to solve the dilemma between voters. But what rules or what institutions in our political system help solve the dilemma between congressmen and congresswomen from the same party? I'll give you a couple. Committees, money, caucuses, and party platforms. Now, at every national convention, we'll talk about party platforms first. At every national convention, which occurs every 4 years prior to the presidential election, the delegates also meet. They certainly meet to select a candidate, but they also meet to iron out a common platform of policies that they're going to agree to try and implement. Now, some people in the party may prefer some different policies than the ones on the platform, but the platform sets an agenda that the party members are supposed to follow, and if they're going to deviate from those, they have to come up with justifications. Now, it's true that if a congressman's voters in his or her district don't like some element of the party platform, sometimes called a plank of the platform, the congressman is going to be under pressure to vote against it and might well vote against it anyway. But the fact that there is a platform already provides a kind of focal point, a kind of point on which candidates are going to merge on, rather than having to come up with their own ideas, which might be very different from one another, and then reconciling those ideas in Congress. Okay, committee seats. Committee seats give congressmen and women more power to shape specific areas of policy that they're interested in. Now, committee seats are allocated by the party leadership, and anyone who displeases that leadership may not receive a very favorable committee assignment, right? So if you are representing a farm district, you really want to be on that agriculture committee. You really don't want to be on, I don't know, the Trade and Maritime Affairs Committee or something. So, there's lots of powerful committees in Congress, and there's lots of specialized committees that have a lot of influence over specific areas of policy that might be of interest to one's constituency. And of course, it would be highly attractive for a member of Congress to sit on those influential committees. And of course, some assignments are better than others, and so keeping in good graces with the party leadership is going to help smooth the way towards a more profitable committee assignment. So if the party leadership wants to push through a policy that is not popular among all members of its party, it can use the threat of a bad committee seat to keep the congressmen who have different opinions in line. Money is also important. Parties fundraise and then distribute funds to candidates, especially those candidates facing tough re-election bids. A candidate who disobeys the party may find him or herself short of funds, or having those funds go to, even worse, a primary challenger that the party has motivated to challenge the candidate in the candidate's own district. This move can be dangerous for both the party and the congressman being challenged when a sitting congressman or a sitting senator receives a primary challenge, but these reflect genuine differences in both interests and in ideology that parties have to iron out amongst themselves. But certainly money is a tool to, again, keep party members from voting always what they prefer over what the party prefers. And we'll talk about this in week 4. We'll talk about this when we talk about collective action problems, but there's a fairly heavy, and because the party runs in every district, right? Big political parties in the United States run candidates in every district. But individual candidates only run in one district. So parties have to care about what people think in all the districts, whereas individual congressmen and women only really have to care about what people think in their district. And because districts in the United States are so varied, right, demographically, ideologically, in terms of which industries are important, in terms of which policy priorities are important, in terms of which values constituents have, that means that each party is, what might be good for the district might not be good for the country. And so, again, the candidate may find that they have a strong incentive to deviate from what the party wants, and so money is going to be an important way of trying to keep people on the coordinated solution that the party has dictated, rather than trying to defect and making the party's job harder in all of the other districts in the country. And finally, caucuses. Now, caucuses are part of the informal arrangements in Congress. Caucuses are basically when congressmen agree to meet informally because they share an interest in an area of policy. Right, so you have people who are interested in energy policy, environmental policy, defense policy, national security of various sorts, internet, technology. I mean, you name the area of policies, you have some congressmen who have a particular interest in those areas of policy. And so those who do will join a caucus that is formed around the goals of passing better policy in those areas. And so what that means is that congressmen who caucus together will tend to vote together, but they will also tend to discuss and strategize about how to get their agenda passed on that area of policies. And these meetings, of course, provide opportunities to strike deals in order to line up behind common policies. Now, typically, caucuses form within parties. That is to say, it'll be the Republican caucus on this and that, or the Democratic caucus on this and that. Occasionally, they can also be bipartisan, where you have people from both parties who are interested in an issue, and they don't find that the leadership of their party is particularly focused on that issue, and so they feel the need to come together to try and coordinate, to try and strategize together. Again, these are informal institutions. They come and go based on what's important to a particular session of Congress. But what they do provide is an opportunity to coordinate, an opportunity to talk and strike bargains in order to overcome a coordination problem. Now, it's worth noting that in the United States, relative to most advanced democracies, political parties are weak. They have relatively fewer tools to discipline their members than parties in other major industrialized democracies. What are the sources of this weakness in the United States? Well, the sources are institutional. They are the rules that are in play. In particular, the fact that primaries get to decide which candidates run, not the party, and the electoral rules. In this case, single-member district, first past the post, or SMDFPTP, electoral rules, single-member district, first past the post, electoral rules, which dictate that individuals have to run in districts, and parties have to run a series of districts rather than running nationally. And we'll see that this makes the parties a little bit weaker. Now, primaries make parties weak because the control over candidate selection is put into the hands of the electorate of that party, typically, not the party leadership. In the United Kingdom, you also have a single-member district, first past the post electoral system, but the party leaders decide who runs in every district. So a party leader can say, hey, Bob, we want you in Congress, go run in this district, right? And Bob goes to that district and runs. Typically, there's not necessarily residency requirements, or if there are residency requirements, they're very weak residency requirements. And so the National Party can so-called parachute candidates into districts that they need to get elected. And you could think of all kinds of reasons why they might want to do this. They might want to do it for gender balance reasons or racial balance reasons. They might also want to do it because this person is of particular use to them, because they have policy expertise that the party wants to have, and so they need to get them elected, and so they'll parachute them into a very safe district, and so therefore get them elected. And this is a great tool to reward loyal, useful members of parliament in the UK, and a way to punish members of parliament that tend to buck the interests of the National Party for whatever reason. So in the United States, we don't have that. In the United States, the electorate in each district decides who gets to represent them in that district. That is to say, the electorate of that party. So the Republican Party of Tennessee gets to decide who gets to run on the Republican Party ticket for Senate in Tennessee, not anyone else, and certainly not the National Party. So the National Party in the United States can't say, if you don't play ball, you can't run as a Democrat or a Republican, right? And the Republican Party right now is facing this issue of its lack of control, and it's having to come to terms with its lack of control over who represents it in the presidential election of 2016, where Donald Trump, a lifelong Democrat, and a candidate that comes with quite a lot of baggage, looks like he's sailing towards the Republican nomination, and a lot of people in the Republican Party, especially in the leadership, feel this is contrary to the interests of the party, but they don't get to decide who runs. It's the voters in the Republican Party who get to decide, and as a result, it looks very likely that Donald Trump will be the nominee. Whether that increases the Republican Party's chances of winning the election is another story. The Democratic Party, interestingly enough, has these superdelegates. And of course, superdelegates have come into scrutiny this electoral season because they have largely pledged themselves so far to Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, and that has made the race less close than it otherwise might be on the Democratic side. Superdelegates are an institutionalized way, because they're selected by the party, are an institutionalized way that helps the party retain some control over who's the presidential nominee. So who the presidential nominee is on the Democratic side is partly, in some a fairly small part, but partly a matter of what the party organization, the leaders of the party, think, and partly what the voters of the Democratic Party think. So it's a combination of the two, but it helps retain some control. It means that the Democratic Party has slightly more control over their brand name, so to speak, and who represents their brand in the presidential election than the Republican Party, where it's the voters alone who get to decide. So, what this means is that parties are relatively weaker. We say they're weaker because they're not able to exercise as much control over the people who represent the party in Congress, in state legislatures, and so on and so forth. In the United States, like I mentioned earlier, to get elected, you have to make your constituents happy, and that's it. You do not have to make your party happy, particularly if you have enough money, and if you're popular in a district. It doesn't really matter which party you're going to run on, because they're going to vote for you anyway. And it's worth noting you don't have to make anyone outside your district happy either, which means that you don't have to worry so much about the national brand name of your party. What you have to worry about is whether you're popular enough in your district. And so this is why single-member districts makes parties a little bit weaker. What this means is the party, the Democratic Party and Republican Party sometimes has to live with members who have ideas that are actually quite different from the rest of the party or the mainstream of the party. And what this means is that each party has congressmen and senators who don't necessarily always play ball and are generally more independent-minded. One example of this is the Southern Democrats, who eventually became so out of the mainstream of the Democratic Party in the 1960s that they started basically becoming Republicans. So Southern Democrats, very conservative, particularly on social issues, Democrats, ended up in the Republican Party by the 1990s. And this sort of drift made life a little bit tough for the Democratic Party, because the Democratic Party platform had to reconcile very, very, very different points of view from the 1960s to the 1980s. Okay, now in systems where people vote for parties rather than candidates when they go to the ballot box, these are called list PR systems, where instead of voting for a particular candidate when you go to vote for Congress, you're voting for a party, and then the party decides the candidate. So if there's no districts, parties have to tailor their platform to the country as a whole. So each individual member of the legislature is going to be dependent on a strategy developed by the party. So the party certainly does not, in these cases, need to cater to small, isolated geographic constituencies that might be out of touch with the mainstream. And the party does not really need to face so much of a coordination problem with its members. The coordination problems is not so much there because the tools exist to discipline party members, especially deciding who gets to fill up that electoral list is something that the party decides, not so much the electorate. So this weakness of political parties is good to the extent that voters and party activists have more of a say in the selection of candidates than party elites. What this means is that at some level this is more democratic. It ensures that elites do not take over the conversation too much within a particular political party, and it ensures that the interests represented by the candidates are fairly in touch with what the electorate wants. So all of that seems pretty good. But it's got a serious downside, and its downside is that it makes it much harder for parties to come together as parties to vote on legislation. Republican leadership that wants to get a bill passed has to engage in serious negotiation within its party to make sure that even if it has a nominal majority in Congress, that it can actually get the votes on any particular bill, because there's a wide spectrum of Republican voters, just like there's a wide spectrum of Democratic voters. The features of our system, the weakness of the parties, means that American congressmen and senators tend to vote against their party more often than just about any other democracy. You often see a high level of party cohesion because competition requires cooperation. If you're going to compete, you need to have a united front. You need to play as a team, to use the metaphor. Right? You need to play as a team, and it looks like American congressmen and senators are less team players than just about any other politicians in any other democracy around the world. And that's a function of primaries, and it's a function of the electoral system. So, let's summarize. Political parties help solve coordination problems between citizens with similar interests by helping organize methods of selecting common candidates, for example, primaries or caucuses. Actually, in this case, a caucus is different from the caucus that we talked about in this lecture. A caucus is a group of people that get together and talk about who they're going to vote for before they vote. Some states do that instead of primaries. It's still very democratic, it's still close to the people, but there's more conversation involved. So Iowa has famous caucuses, for example. Political parties try to solve coordination problems between different elected representatives from the party by establishing a common legislative agenda, a platform, and then distributing resources to electoral representatives who actually follows a coordinated solution as dictated by the agenda setters, namely the party leaders, right? These resources include committee seats and campaign funds, so support. Now, parties in the United States are weaker than parties in many other democracies because of the primary system that selects candidates within each district, and the electoral system that actually makes parties run in districts rather than a single national district. These weaknesses are a reason why coordination problems and other collective dilemmas do not get solved sometimes. Elected representatives vote against their party. Sometimes legislation fails to go through, even though it would be better for the group, in this case the party, to have some legislation go through than no legislation go through. There's a coordination problem here, right? It's better to have a matching outcome, but because people disagree on which matching outcome and are unable to resolve their differences because parties are weak and cannot make sure that one coordinated solution wins, what that means is that the dilemmas sometimes do not get solved in the United States, whereas in other countries they often do get solved. Okay, so good. That's it for parties and the coordination problem.